What's going on, guys? My name is Jake. That's Jesus. This is your body comp prescription, where we help you navigate through all things health and fitness. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at bodycomprx. We're not doctors or nutritionists, as always, so please keep that in mind as we begin the conversation. Jesus, what are we going over today for episode number 6?
Yeah, guys, greetings. Episode number 6 was actually a special request from one of our followers, right?
Mm-hmm.
They requested we talk about hydration. Now, hydration is such a very broad topic. So today we'll be talking about what is hydration, how does it affect hydration, how does it affect you in many different ways, and everything there is to know about hydration, right?
Cool. Yeah, I think this is a well-requested thing too, because there's always people asking like, oh, how much water should I drink throughout the day? And we'll get to that a little bit later. But as always, we're going to kind of like break down the science, understand why this stuff is important. But actually, I think where I want to start is I want to throw this all the way back to like middle school bio, when we're first learning about the cell, learning about like what it is, what it does, and all that kind of stuff. But, we should remember that, the cell contains a lot of fluid in it, and it has this thing called a permeable membrane, which allows water to go in and out, where it carries, a bunch of different ions like potassium, sodium, stuff like that. And that allows it to pass through, go in and out as it pleases, and does all of its processes that happen in the cell. So hydration of the cell is really, really important because what we actually know, or may not know, is that cell swelling, aka hydration of the cell, actually promotes protein synthesis, which is a good thing, right? Regardless of whatever our fitness-based goals are, protein synthesis is a good thing because it helps maintain and build muscle, right? And when the cell doesn't have enough water in it, it actually inhibits protein synthesis and goes through something called proteolysis, which is protein breakdown. So I think the way that I want to transition this into what we're talking about is starting to talk about performance and how hydration can affect performance, or even if it does affect performance. So when looking for supporting information about how hydration can affect different areas of performance, a lot of the studies were actually like inconclusive, just because of how many variables there are to control within performance-based things. With like, if you're trying to find out if water and hydration affects your strength, like your power, your endurance, like basic hypertrophy or muscle building, stuff like that, it's so hard to know because obviously you have people to deal with, and people are different from person to person and how they excrete their fluids. You have the programs that they're on, and if they're the right program, if certain body types affect or get affected differently by these things. So there's just a lot of variables that come into play to know if hydration definitively affects performance. But what I would say is, like you shouldn't take that chance just because there's no clear findings on it affecting, like helping your workouts or harming your workouts. I think you shouldn't even take the chance, why see how dehydrated you can be to still like make the progress that you want? Because being dehydrated causes like a slew of other problems that can make training and physical activity so much more dangerous. So like, just I would say don't even take the chance, yeah, even though there's no clear benefits, you should always do your best to try and stay as hydrated as possible.
Yeah, and I think you had a really good point. We said bringing it back to 8th grade science, and something we've always been taught is that our body is made, it's like 80% of water. Our body just has so much fluid in it. So without water, without anything in our system, you could see it's kind of like oil to a car. Without the water, our body can't really function. And then when you brought up performance, I think it's very spot on because, when you're working out, our body naturally warms up, our temperature increases internally, and, to cool yourself down, your body does many different things such as sweating, trying to keep that body temperature low. So it's really good to consider that. Our body, we said, it contains mainly water, mostly water. One thing to consider is how we consume or how do we come up with this water. 80% of that we have it from intaking, your natural daily fluids, drinking water, drinking any kind of fluids, and 20% of that comes from the foods we consume, right? Fruits and veggies naturally have water in them. I think a good example is watermelon. Because watermelons are full of water, right? And those are really good. And then with that water fluids we are consuming, one thing to realize is that when we eat this water, so then our body could do these natural things that it does, such as creating tears, mucus, saliva. Water also serves as a lubricating factor for these areas, right? And then when you are producing, tears and mucus, that comes from that helps in many different ways. A lot of the times when you're congested, a lot of times you hear doctors will tell you, consume more fluids during this time period, because a lot of the times you're lacking that water. And it also helps with synovial fluid. The synovial fluid, so those who don't know, it's the fluid in between your two bones, right? That fluid helps you tremendously. Without that fluid, many people know that as arthritis, right? Very painful. So fluid helps you in that sense. It also helps with digestion, breaking down your food, right? Without the fluid, you can't really pass down water. And then while the food is already in your system, going through your esophagus, going through your intestines, it has natural fluid breaking that food down. And then lastly, it helps with blood flow. And, we've talked about many other episodes in the past, how blood flow is important. This having fluid and proper amounts of fluid in your system will help you with that.
Yeah, I think that, like, to kind of sum that up a little bit, is it's like hydration affects so many things that are happening unconsciously in our body, and that's why it's important to keep that up, because so many things rely on it. I think hydration definitely affects, like, even metabolism as well, like how you how you break down the nutrients in the food that you're consuming. And just to give you some background, when your total body of water is decreased, meaning, like, aka you're dehydrated, what that does is it increases the amount of cortisol and norepinephrine. And for people who don't know what norepinephrine is, though it's similar to cortisol, they're both stress response hormones, and we know that those aren't good. Having high levels of those are not good for us, especially in the sense of recovery. But also, being dehydrated can also hinder the amount of testosterone that gets produced during exercise. It also messes with the way that it breaks down carbs, since we know our macros are proteins, fats, and carbs. They all get used in different ways in our body. We already talked about how the cell being dehydrated, that inhibits protein synthesis, meaning it makes it harder to make proteins. So that's already bad for proteins, but it can also affect how our carbs get used as energy and how our fats get used as energy. And that's super important. So, a lot of these things, like a lot of these results suggest that, like, being dehydrated can mess with your hormone function, as well as, like, in response to your metabolism being all messed up, and how you do that during, like, resistance-based exercise.
Yeah. One thing I also wanted to cover is, I just mentioned right now how we consume our fluids, or how do we intake these fluids. But I think something we need to consider is, where do these fluids go? How do we excrete these fluids? How do we become dehydrated if we're naturally consuming all these fluids, right? And one thing to realize is that you lose these fluids in your system through doing things naturally, such as breathing, sweating, urinating, bowel movements. It all has some sort of fluids that are being excreted from your body, right?
Yeah.
So it was kind of very interesting when I was looking at this, because I really wanted to know, like, how much fluids do we lose naturally when you're just easily going to the bathroom, right? Whether it's urinating, bowel movements, you lose about 1,600 milliliters. And then I'll kind of break this down a little further. So when you're sweating, right? On average, you lose about 600 milliliters. And then things like breathing, when you breathe out, you're actually releasing water molecules, and then when you're sweating or your your skin is your skin actually evaporates some water in your system. You lose about another 800. And so when you do that math, that's about 12 cups a day of water alone. You're losing, right? And that's something to consider, because if you're not consuming at least about 12 cups a day, like you're already naturally going to be dehydrated, right? And that's not taking into account to whether you had a very strenuous workout, whether it was a very hot day if you live in California like we do, right? But the temperature is really warm. That's not talking a lot. Like if you're on a podcast right now, my mouth's starting to get a little dry. I want some water,
Oh,
things
dude,
like that, different
I'm staring at my
variables.
bottle of water right now. Oh my God.
Yeah, exactly, right. And so those are things we don't take into account. So this is just on an average about 12 cups a day we are losing, just for us being humans and just for us going about our daily life. So
Mm-hmm.
that's something to consider along with that. And then you were talking a little bit about metabolism.
Mm-hmm.
Um, when I think about those who are in a diet, I think it's very hard to over consume water, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's there's so many of us who think we drink water, like lots of water, but we don't. And then so many of us who think we are consuming just the right amount of water, but we
Yeah.
actually aren't. Um, Water can actually help many different ways, especially if like you're dieting, for example. I think it could help you with replacing sugary drinks. These sugary drinks are usually very high calorie, right?
Yeah.
So I think if you replace those drinks with just plain water, it has many, many, many benefits to you,
Yeah.
and it kind of suppresses that feeling of being hungry, right? So it
Mm-hmm.
gives you that sense of being full, which we know could help you in consuming less foods. It just has a lot of great benefits.
Yeah. I think going back to what you said about it, like it being really hard to overconsume water. Well, I think I agree 100% because, when someone asks me like, oh, how much water should I be drinking? And they're like, oh, like a half a gallon, when, like the measurement itself doesn't really matter because it obviously varies from person to person. But, um, they're like, well, isn't it bad to drink too much water? And it's like, yes, having too little and too much of anything is going to, not be necessarily good for you. But the just to really emphasize how hard it is to like um, to drink that much water to where it actually hinders like some of the other things that we've already talked about, and it causes like decreases of things that are normal. It's so hard to do. You can drink an excess of over two gallons of water and still not be what would that be, hyperhydrated, I guess.
Yeah.
Like you would get sick of water before you would get you'd be consuming too much water. So I just kind of want to throw that out there. But
No, I think that's definitely, because I feel like so many people are like, oh my God, like, did you consume a gallon? And it's like, we're just, let alone things we do right now. It's currently very sunny today and very hot. It's winter, but here in LA, it's hot outside this weekend. And,
yeah,
you just going outside. I was out there earlier yesterday, and I was starting to sweat. And, I was like, oh my God, I felt getting dehydrated just being outside. So that's something that's really good to consider. You
yeah,
want to talk about how does age come into play?
yeah. I think another factor that gets overlooked sometimes about what affects hydration is definitely the age. We may not think about it because we're always fixated on, again, like the number of glasses of water that we drink a day or whatever that case may be. But your age kind of indirectly has a correlation with your hydration levels based upon your activity levels. So,
Mm-hmm.
and this will make sense in a second, because your activity levels oftentimes dictate your thirst response. Because when you're more active, you feel like you lost a lot of fluids. You're sweating, you're hot, and you can actively feel that things are exiting your body, and you feel less nourished. So you drink water to help that. But vice versa, for people who are inactive, their thirst response kind of gets like desensitized or blunted, or however you want to you want to say that. But just to give you
Yeah.
an example, is a lot of older people have hindered thirst responses because they don't um, exercise as much, and they're not as active as they maybe used to be, so they don't feel as conscious about wanting to replenish their water, because they feel like they didn't lose anything yet. Like their activity level is so low that they're like, oh well, I didn't even expend any energy today. But in reality, we already talked about how those fluids excrete our body in kind of like passive processes that we don't even think about. So
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times older individuals become dehydrated because, again, indirectly, they may not be as active as they used to be. So their sensitivity to knowing when they're dehydrated has gone down a good bit.
No, yeah, I think that's totally true. I think when you look at, for example, even young kids haven't developed that part of their body where they're able to really understand their thirst levels and have that thirst response, right?
Oh
That's
yeah,
why a lot of kids, you've seen them, especially on hot days, you hear a lot about kids, their body temperature is going up, and, they sometimes you even pass out during
yeah,
recess or
pass out.
lunch, yeah, when, or have bloody noses.
Hmm.
Um, but also elderly, I think it's really good to consider because sometimes a lot of elderly have chronic diseases and they take medication that is known to, naturally dehydrate you. So if you're already not drinking enough water and plus you're taking those medications that you really need, it's something to consider because, you might need to consume more than you really think, right?
Yeah, yeah. I think I want to start segueing into the like another factor that gets affected by how hydrated you are is your body composition. We talked about this in episode 4, and how like what body composition is and how certain factors affect it. But going back, if you didn't listen to it, you should. But just to kind of break it down for you, we talked about fat mass and fat-free mass. Fat mass is obviously your weight that's contributed by fat, the amount of fat that you have. But your fat-free mass is again your organs, your muscles, your bones, and your hydration levels, like how much water you have in your body. So if you elevate the amount of water that you drink and how hydrated you are, you're actually increasing your body composition of fat-free mass to fat mass, which is what we're looking for. So if you're one way that you can um, change your body composition for the better is simply just by increasing your hydration levels.
Oh yeah, yeah, I think you're right. Also, when we're talking about body composition, how to measure that, I think one thing to really look into is that you should be weighing yourself in the morning. And I say this because in the morning, typically that's when you're leanest, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm talking about morning as right before you consume or drink anything, step on that scale, and you really get a great idea, a pretty accurate idea of what your body composition is. And this comes from many different things, but I think that's really something to also consider.
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot of factors, or there's a lot of um, variables that get limited by doing it that early, because um, there's nothing that has gone in by the start of the day yet. So it kind
Hmm.
of just like narrows down the amount of things that can affect your body composition for sure.
Yeah, yeah. So I think the very famous question we get is, how much water should we be drinking?
Yeah, that's probably
Right?
what everyone's waiting what
Yeah,
everyone's waiting for.
so what's the final answer? How many is it? 8 cups? Is it a gallon? I personally, I like to say is you are really the judge of that. Um, you should know. I mean, you should really also understand, like, if you're out by your day and you've only had one bottle of water throughout your whole entire day, it doesn't take a scientist to tell you, yeah, you haven't had enough water.
Yeah.
Um, right? That's only like 16 fluid ounces, maybe at most. And so if you're gonna have a very strenuous workout, or if you're going for a long run, um, that you're naturally, now, at least now, you should know after listening to the podcast, that you're naturally going to be losing lots of fluids.
Mm-hmm.
So what I like to do, for example, is if I know I'm going to go on a run tomorrow during my lunch break, and I know it's going to be about 80 degrees out there, I know it's going to be hot, I know I'm going to be sweating more than I naturally would, I know that I need to start hydrating today, now, so then I could be prepared for tomorrow. And even tomorrow
Mm-hmm.
morning, I know that I'm going to make sure I was drinking enough water throughout my morning before my run. Um, because we lose a lot. And I think it was very interesting because I found this research, some college athletes, right? They were trying to look into this, how much water they were consuming, how much water they lose after their workouts. And so what they did is they measured their weight before a workout and then after a workout, right? On average, they saw that an athlete would lose about a pound after the workout, and
Okay.
you know they were realizing that this pound of of weight that they've lost is actually coming from their water. From naturally sweating and secreting all these fluids, you naturally shed about a pound. So a pound of water is
That's a
about
lot.
16 fluid ounces, right? And that was just alone with working out. That's not even
Yeah.
considering everything they did prior to that and everything they're doing after that.
Yeah,
So
that's such a
that just
small
kind of,
part of the day. Yeah.
yeah. So sorry that it's not an actual number I'm giving you guys, but I think it's something to consider is look at all the factors that are going on in your life, and you should be able to tell how much water you should be drinking.
Yeah, my biggest my I think the way that I indicate if I'm dehydrated or not is if I feel guilty about the amount of water that I've had today,
Yeah.
because I naturally consume lots and lots of water just because I feel like I need it and I notice when I don't have it. But when I notice that I don't have water, I know I'm dehydrated.
Hmm.
I feel like that's a good way. If you don't feel guilty about the amount of water that you drink, obviously that's a varies from person to person, but I
Hmm.
feel like your guilt will tell you if you're hydrated or not. But
Yeah.
just to kind of keep going on some of the other things that get affected by um, how hydrated you are is your sleep. I know we talk about sleep a lot on this podcast, but like um, we already talked about how these fluids get excreted almost passively, and that's why we're dehydrated in the morning when we wake up because we went so long without consuming any water. And that again should prove to or support the importance of why uh, water is important. But the amount of water that you have before you go to sleep also affects your quality of sleep. I found studies that pretty clearly state that if you are dehydrated before you go to sleep, sleep quality goes down. The amount of continuous sleep that you have, so like the duration and like one long sleep period. So like instead, if you're dehydrated, you sleep 6 hours straight instead of 8 hours straight or something like that. And I think that's pretty important to uh, reiterate as well that something as simple as sleep that happens every single day gets affected too. But I think I just want to wrap this up by kind of saying that we obviously talked about how hydration affects your metabolism, like how your body processes its nutrients and your food and stuff. um, it affects your sleep, like I just said. We always talk about sleep on here. It affects your body composition, your fat mass versus your fat free mass.
Hmm.
And you know it may even affect your performance as well. I know we talked about how some cases are inconclusive, but um, again, you don't want to leave that to chance. It's just you might as well just cash in on your insurance policy and make sure that you're all in on hydration so you don't know the side effects of, like, it's like you're preparing for something to happen, and it like will never happen if as long as you are hydrated and doing what you need to do.
Yeah.
But do you have anything else you want to say?
No, I think hydration is important. And if you don't have yourself a decent hydro flask or water bottle, you should definitely look into investing one because it will
Worthwhile.
definitely help. Yeah, it's worthwhile, and as you can tell, it's a pretty good investment into your daily life.
Yeah. Well, cool. All right. I think that's all we got today. Thank you guys for tuning in and listening as always. Hope you guys found it entertaining. Hope you guys learned something. But until next time, we'll talk to you soon. Peace.
Peace out. Thanks again for tuning into our podcast. We appreciate each and every one of you who took the time to listen to this week's episode.
If you enjoyed the conversation, we would love it if you shared this with someone who would find this helpful. Be sure to check us out on Instagram at bodycomprx for more tips and information. We'll catch you guys in the next episode.